Okay, I think I'll make the first slab cut there. Unless I get to the other end and can get a shorter piece that might have some pretty grain pattern in it. Let's take a look. Actually, it looks like that'll work out well on this side too. Let's do some sawing. The saw did labor a bit through some of the hard knots at the opposite end, but I think we got a place to start. I'll go ahead and change over to the bimetal blade now, and we'll make a cut through it with that, and then take a look at what it looks like for straightness as we come back out of the cut. Stick around. Okay, I have changed over to the bimetal blade. It's set to about the depth I want it to be. The one thing I did have to do is to take the chainsaw and trim just a little bit off of this edge. Actually, after this cut, I may need to trim just a little bit more. There's pretty tight clearance on that side there. But let's take a look at what this blade does. Once we get all the way through the cut, I'll go ahead and move the saw again, and we can check this one for straightness. What I suspect, just from having used this blade for one other cut, is that particularly here where we've got a full 21 or 22 inch cut to make, and especially since it's fairly hard and we have the knots down at this end, really, truly, this end is beautiful, but I suspect that it's really going to labor this engine in making this first 4 feet or so of cut. We'll see. As I expected, that pushed a lot harder than with the previous blade. Now that's due in part that I've got a wider cut. But especially on that far end where there was 21, 22 inches in width, and through those hard knots, it cut real hard through that. In fact, I may have hit a couple nails or some sort of contaminants in one of those knots up there. So we'll take a look at it once I get this slab pulled off, and we'll go ahead and check it to straightness. One thing that I'm noticing right off the bat is that I have about 1/8 of an inch between the log and the blade on this side, and I'm relatively tight on this side. So my cut is a little out of level. As I'm looking across the cut, I am seeing that it is not a great cut for straightness, that there is a bit of a dip in the middle right after, not long after I came out of those knots up there. So I didn't get nearly as true of cut with this one. But we'll take a look at it as I back out. I can see that, unfortunately, my camera tilted from the vibration of the saw running part of the way through the cut, so we'll go back the other direction. It looks like we've got about 1/2 an inch here between the blade and the log, down to about 1/4 of an inch there, down to being pretty much tight there, down to about 3/8 to 1/2 an inch there, about 1/4, 3/8 there, and then that 3/8 seems to hold true the rest of the way through the log where we had a little softer wood to cut through. So there's a variance of about 1/2 an inch from straight on that board. I'll change over to the carbide tip blade and then make adjustments on the guides again. I've had my lunch, I'm back out. My tarp had blown away, but the wind has died down a bit, so I've put it back up. One more cut, an 8/4 cut, will take me just about to the center piece, so we'll go ahead and make that cut with the carbide tip blade, and then I think I'm going to flip it back over and do the rest of the cutting from the other side. I have done one pass across this with the carbide tip blade just to get this evened up and flattened out a little bit. I took out about a 1/2 inch piece. One thing that I think is noteworthy with Hackberry, you don't get the warm colors that you do from a lot of woods, but for high contrast in colors between dark and light, Hackberry is absolutely beautiful. And even in some of the areas, as straight a grain as this wood is, I was not expecting to see any really pretty grain patterns, but we actually got some. So before we make this next cut, I want to wet this down and we'll take a look at it. For as straight grained as the lumber is, I am really pleased with some of the grain patterns. We're even seeing some of the rays that you get from quarter sawn lumber by that knot. I love it. Let's get back on the tripod and we'll cut the next 8/4 piece out of this. Here we go. That definitely wasn't fast, but it sure pushed a lot easier than the bimetal blade did. There's a lot of stress on that piece of lumber too. As soon as I got to the end of the cut, it split at that center pith. This end may not be usable, at least in very wide pieces, but that far end I think is going to be some beautiful furniture eventually. Remember now that this blade has actually cut 3 ponderosa pine logs before it, and those pine logs were anywhere from, I had cants anywhere from 15 to 21 or 22 inches square, and I cut it all into 3/4 inch lumber, so this blade has been used a lot. And it's still relatively sharp. We'll check it out and see what it is for straightness, but I'm still liking this blade. Let's see if we can get a feel for straightness of this one. There was one bit of a hump right here at that hardwood knot. Other than that, that's a good straight cut. And as much cutting as this carbide tip blade has done already, I am quite impressed. All right, to keep things from getting boring or too long, we'll just speed up and breeze through the rest of these cuts. I think I should have another 5 pieces out of this. Well, I think for this old man, there's no way I would want to make a living dragging those slabs around. They were probably in excess of 200 pounds a piece, maybe substantially more than that for these couple that were close to the center and a little bit wider, but they're pretty heavy. I think that 1,200 pounds is probably a good estimate for the total weight of the log. Going to do a real quick recap on what I think of these blades. The Silvertips I've been using for a long time, and I think they're really, for general purpose, a very good blade. They tend to last through a couple, maybe 3 hours worth of cutting. In resharpening them, I've had really good results with resharpening, in that I don't think that I notice any difference between a new blade and the resharpened blade. So far as initial sharpness goes, I don't think they hold their edge quite as long. I'll talk more about that in just a second. Okay, so the Silvertips, 42 thousandths of an inch thick. The kerf that they cut is 88 thousandths. They sell for about 20 bucks a piece. The bimetal blades, I'm not pleased with, at least not with this saw. If there was a saw that had more horsepower to it and could run the cuts faster, they may be very, very acceptable. I think I purchased 5 of them, and of course I'll keep them. And any logs that I suspect having nails in them, I think those will probably hold up better than any of the other ones that I've got. So I'll use them for that. My use will be very limited. The one thing that I noticed on the one cut that we did on camera is toward the middle of the cut, I got to seeing some steam coming excuse me. I got to seeing some steam coming off the blade. It's a pretty chilly day, especially this morning. I was using cold water, so I don't know just how warm the blade would need to get to be able to see steam coming off of it. But that was probably the worst area of the cut, is where I noticed that. I increased the flow on the lubricant, And when I got toward the end of the cut, it was more consistent. It still wasn't perfect, and out of the 3 blades, that one was by far the worst in being able to make a nice straight cut. So that one I wouldn't recommend, at least for this mill. The Razortip, oh, that one sells for 52 bucks. It is 50 thousandths in thickness and cuts a saw kerf of 107 thousandths, so a little over 1/10 of an inch, about 22% wider. Then we go to the Razortip Carbide, which is a blade I just absolutely love. It's on the saw now. I've probably used it for 8 to 10 hours of cutting, and it's sharp enough that it's still leaving a straight edge. It's relatively easy to push. I just adore that blade. Now, the specifications on it so far as thickness are about the same as the Silvertip. The thickness of the blade is 45 thousandths and leaves a saw kerf of 85 thousandths, which again is just about the same as the Silvertip. Sells for 72 bucks a piece, which is considerably more, almost 4 times the cost of the Silvertip blade. But to me, it is well worth the money. You know, I think that even if it was dull right now, probably dollar for dollar, I'm getting the best use out of these Razortip carbide tip blades. They're a wonderful blade. I'd recommend them for any mill. Now, the Bimetal and the Razortip aren't available in the 1¼ inch width like the Silvertip is. And the 1¼ inch width is what came with, or was recommended for the saw. The 1½ inch wide blades are a little bit harder to install, but still not any real problem. They work quite well on this mill. You just got to allow a little extra time and make sure everything's really clean when you put them in. So that's it for my blade, or what I advise for blades. Again, my favorite, the Razortip Carbide. I really like the Silvertips too, and the Bimetal, not so much for this saw. The one thing that I would be happy to do a review on is that sharpener, the BMS25. It's Woodmizer's least expensive sharpener, but I think that thing is just great. It takes an awful lot of adjusting and finessing to figure out what settings to use. The one complaint that I would have on it is it's not made for the exact profile of the Woodmizer blades. It's made for it, but it doesn't fit it exactly. And what I mean by that is the gullet isn't always cleaned out without taking an awful lot off of the tip. I think after a couple of sharpenings that probably would improve. I don't know how many sharpenings I get out of it. So far I've only resharpened once. I really like that. But anyway, leave a comment down below, and if you'd like me to do a review of that BMS25 sharpener. I think it's great. I would also appreciate comments, as we talked about before, is that upslope as I initially start the cut. It was noticeable with all 3 blades, not excessive. It started out, it maybe gained 1/4 inch in 2 feet, something like that. And most notably was the first 6 or 8 inches. So that's going to be waste anyway. It's not a huge deal, but if anyone knows how to solve that, I'd really appreciate it. Like I say, it doesn't come from the blade being out of level. The blade is parallel with the track, so I'm not sure what else I could do. I'm trying to keep as tight a clearances as I can on those ceramic pads, and the more expensive Woodmizers will have ball bearings instead of the ceramic pads, but I've had good luck with the ceramic pads. They don't seem to wear much, and they do hold a pretty nice tight cut. I've made cuts as thin as 1/8 of an inch, so you can almost cut veneer with this particular machine. That's it for episode 26. Thank you for joining me. Until next time, well, let's just say we'll see you later.